So thanks for joining us today for this presentation on strategies for CaRMS interviews. So as a disclaimer, I'm a resident who matched last year to my top choice program. I wanted to make this presentation because last year while I was preparing for my interviews, I found it was sometimes challenging to get some information on how best to prepare. And as a resident now, I'm often getting questions on how we can prepare this year for your match. And I just thought it would be nice to consolidate this information in a short presentation so that all of you can have the best chance. So, of course, everything I say in this presentation is just from my own experience, and it's my own opinion, and I don't represent my program or school, and I have not participated in any admissions for residency, so take everything I say with a grain of salt and try your best to also speak to other residents who have gone through your program of choice so that they can also tell you about their experiences and their tips. A lot of going through this process of CaRMS and matching, you'll discover that different programs and different specialties have their own preferences, and so it's best to tailor your advice to get it from folks who have gone through the program and match cycle that you're hoping to get through as well. So let's get started. So what is the purpose of the CaRMS interview and the interview process? So I really think that the purpose of going through all these CaRMS interviews and having each program, speak to you is so that they can get to know you as a person before, you sign up for a contract that can last 5 years, and you're very involved in the service of their department. So probably the most important component of interviewing is just being able to get to know you better as a candidate and for you to get to know the program a bit better. Other things that I think the interview can serve to do is see how the candidate acts under pressure. That's often the purpose of, unusual questions, sort of out-of-the-box questions, or, asking you many of the same questions and things like that, is to see how you act under pressure. I also think one of the purposes of interviewing would be to see if your personality fits well with their team. They already know the residents they have worked with in the past, and then they want to see if you will be a good addition. And finally, the interview is a chance for you to, communicate about yourself and communicate to them about your interest and motivation to join the program. So being able to communicate that effectively and succinctly is also a skill. And it's also a skill for how we work with patients. So I think, the interview also lets the panel and interviewers see how well you communicate with them. So everyone wants to know what interviewers look for. I think the best way to try and figure this out is to always remember that this is a job interview, and the job is to be a resident for them. So what they're looking for is a good resident to join their program. If you think about it, what would you want from a resident joining your program? Ideally, it should probably be someone you want to help you over this work period, which can last anywhere between 2 and 5 years. And never forget also that different people may be looking for different things, because we all have different personalities and we all have different priorities. So I would say, you can't be everything to everyone. And I think what people are primarily looking for, though, is someone who fits well with their team and someone that they would like to join them in a residency program. So I tried to think about what I would want from a junior resident if I were recruiting. And really, I think I'd most prize these attributes, someone who's trustworthy, reliable, and honest. It's very important that a resident is honest, because sometimes, you can make a mistake, or you could maybe not know the answer to something, maybe you didn't check something. And these are all points in time where it's easy for a resident to feel worried about telling the truth about that, and that can compromise patient safety. So I think it's very important that, you know, if for recruitment, to make sure that the candidate is honest and able to say, you know, forthrightly if they've forgotten to do something, so that we can make sure it's done for the safety of the patient. Similarly, you know, I think I would prefer to have someone who helps the team, you know, get all the work done and doesn't cause the team to be unable to get all the work done or harm the team dynamics in any way. And on more practical terms, you know, somebody I would confidently ask to take my call shift if I can't make it, or, you know, someone I would confidently recommend as a doctor to my family and friends. So if you think about it, you know, that's the sort of person who you'd like to work next to you for several years, who you can trust to deliver good patient care, and someone that, you know, the staff and the seniors in the department can feel confident about taking call for them and for representing them and their specialty. So everyone always wants to know what kind of questions you'll get. Really, you know, I interviewed in many different locations across different programs. Many of the questions are quite similar, and usually they have, you know, some components of this list. So I would probably start here in terms of your preparation for what kinds of questions to have an answer for. So the first one is, you know, tell me about yourself. And this is sort of a deceptive question, which seems very open-ended, but actually requires a fairly structured response to keep it succinct. So I would prepare very hard for this question, because essentially it's an open-ended question. You're allowed to talk about whatever you like. It doesn't actually ask you for anything other than telling them about yourself. So, you know, I would keep it structured, you know, figure out what are the things you want them to know about you, and keep it under 2 minutes. So, you know, other questions that you'll typically get would be, you know, why have you decided to apply to the school? Why have you decided to apply to this specialty or this program? And here is where it's a good idea to have an idea of what the program's strengths are, what sort of specific training you'll get from joining this program, particular attributes of this program that they are proud of and that you are looking for when you are applying there. So it's a chance to display, you know, why you want to go specifically to a certain program. And I did have this question many times. I mean, it's very reasonable given that it's a job application. Why do you want to work for them, right? So I would just make sure that, you know, before you interview, that you understand and know the program to some degree. And so that way you have something to say when they're asking you why you're applying to them. Another common set of questions would be like, tell me a time when, etc. And then it'll be sort of any kind of clinical experience question. So they'll usually be asking you, you know, tell me a time when, you know, you had difficulty telling the truth, or tell me a time when you made a mistake, something like that. So, you know, this is typically a question in which you need to be able to tell a full story and explain your role in it, and also explain what you've learned from it. So I would have some, I would take some time to prepare a set of clinical experiences that had an impact on you from your clerkship and from your electives, so you have something to say for these questions. Another section of questions will often be related to the CanMed's roles, and so I would prepare, you know, some positive and negative stories for all of these CanMed roles. So that would be like, you know, when were you a good collaborator? When were you a bad collaborator? When were you, you know, a good communicator, when we're a bad communicator, and things like that, so so that you have an answer for these types of questions. Pretty much anything in your CV or personal letter is fair game for questions. So if you've put it on your CV, like some old paper from 10 years ago that you helped with, just be prepared that you could get questions on that. So you should still remember what that study was about and what your role was in it. If you put like volunteering activities from like a long time ago, you could be asked about it. And so, it's best to at least remember what that was about, and review like any papers and studies you've been a part of that you included on your CV, so you can succinctly, describe what that experience was and your part in it, if you're asked. Another set of questions that can happen would be, about your specialty and the specialty of interest that you're applying for. So, that could be like hot topics in terms of, recently in the news, or recent advances in science, or current issues in politics, or current issues in that are in contention from those who are practicing. So I would just read up a little bit on the specialties you're applying for, just to see what's been going on there. Typically these questions are just to see if you really are interested, because most people who are interested in that field would be a bit up to date on what's going on. And then I also got quite a few questions on how I deal with stress, and what sort of hobbies you have outside of work. And really this sort of thing is to just check that you're a well-rounded person who has like the capability and strategies for handling high amounts of stress. So it is a good opportunity to really think about that as well, and make sure you are being healthy and finding ways to manage your stress, and so you can describe those to the interviewers. And lastly, you can get some weird questions, and it's really hard to predict what these would be, and that's kind of the point. So these weird questions are really to see how you react when there's a surprise. So I would find a way to make sure you stay calm when you're faced with a weird question, and try to come up with a reasonable answer in a reasonable time frame. And these questions are really just to see how you react. So as long as you don't sort of freak out, it should probably be all right. So in terms of how to give a good interview performance, I really think that when you're giving an interview, a lot of the onus is on you to decide what you want to say and how you want to present yourself. And to do a good interview performance, you need to take back some of that planning for yourself. And so, you can decide for yourself what are some things you want the interviewers to know about you before you end the interview. That will let you have a bit of control and a bit of purpose as to, giving this interview, because you have something you want to tell them, and, telling them is the purpose of the interview. Obviously, the interviewers also want to find out some things about you, and that is their purpose in the interview. But just so that you make sure that, you present yourself in the best possible way, I would really try and make sure you find a way to talk about whatever's important to you before time is up. And your aim really is to let the interviewers get to know the real you in the short time you have with them. And interviews can be quite short. They can be, anywhere between 10 to 30 minutes. And, that's a short time to try and get to know someone. So I would, figure out what are those things that you wish that the interviewers would know about you before they accept you for residency, so that they can rank you highly, and make sure those things are declared by the end of the interview. I would also practice quite a lot. Some people will say, you don't need to practice, you can just kind of act normal. But for me, I find interviews are such an abnormal way to interact. So it's quite important to practice so that, when you tell a story, it's succinct, there's a beginning and an end. You don't give too much detail that's unhelpful for the interview. And also you don't forget to say something important. So I would just practice, to the point where you feel relaxed with answering a variety of questions, and also, to the point where you sound like you've practiced, but not that you've memorized some sort of script, because I think everyone knows when, you're asking a question and someone's just, reciting a response, it sounds very unusual. So you just want to practice the point where you feel confident. So time management in the interview is quite important, actually, and often a part where I think candidates can practice towards, but often forget that it's an important component. So often, interviewers will have a sheet of questions in front of them, and they do want to try and get through as many of them as possible. Often, it may or may not be possible depending on how ambitious they were with the questions, but they often do want to move on. So that means when you answer questions, you want to keep everyone engaged, you want to keep them listening to you. And so for that, you can't make stories go on too long. So answers should be less than 2 minutes each. After about 2 minutes, you should, take a breath, let the interviewers ask any follow-up questions or any other questions they want to. But I would try and keep your speaking time, where you're the only one speaking, to less than 2 minutes, to avoid, people losing their attention. The issue is that generally when you start speaking, the interviewers aren't going to interrupt you. That's just kind of the way it is. They just kind of will let you speak for as long or as little as you like. But the trouble with that is if you don't realize how much time is going by, you could end up talking a long time about something and then lose their attention, or you kind of get off track. So I would practice with a timer for sure. Remember that, when you give your answers regarding clinical stories, they need to have some sort of format that listeners can follow. And that's kind of like when you present, a case to your staff, after you've done a consult. You need to be able to explain what was the background, what's the setting of the story, what's the problem or dilemma that you were faced with, and then what did you personally do to address this problem or dilemma. You need to be clear about what your role was in this story, so that they, can understand what exactly you did in this situation. And then you really want to state the outcome as well. So what was the outcome of your intervention or your actions towards this problem? And then lastly, you need to bring this back to your job interview, which is how does, this story and what you did and the outcome, what does all of that have to do with why you're the best residency candidate this year for them? So I would really practice making sure that your questions and answers make sense and help, advance your file so that it makes sense. In terms of how to practice effectively, I would try to dedicate time every day from now until your interviews with some practice time. Often an hour or two is plenty of dedicated practice, but some people will need more and some people need less. So you'll just have to do kind of what suits you. I would practice with a variety of different people. So, that could be peers, that could be residents, that could be other medical students from younger years, that could be, friends. And I would just talk to different people with your answers, because different people will notice different things and also have different preferences for whatever you talk about in your stories. So it's good to kind of get opinions from a variety of people, just so that you can get a more well-rounded view as well of your own answers. You should always time all of your answers. So again, try and keep everything below 2 minutes, so that you make sure that you can answer as many questions as they want on interview day. And you should also check or have someone check if you have some nervous tics like fidgeting or saying a lot, things like that, so that people and you yourself can try and work on them. And also you should try and practice in your interview clothing so that you feel comfortable wearing those on the day of. Like sometimes it can be a bit, funny to wear your interview clothing while you're practicing, but I find it helps a lot with feeling comfortable on the day of. So lastly, you actually get a chance to ask questions about the program as well. And I found in many interviews that they did dedicate quite a lot of time to this to get you to have a chance to ask any questions. So often, especially if you're speaking to a program where you have not visited, or it's not your home program, or you don't know that much about it, this is really a good chance to ask some of those questions you have before you know how to rank this program. And so I would really brainstorm, what are some things you'd like to know about this program before you sign up to go there and work there. So make sure you have a list like that, handy, and that you've thought about it carefully, because this might be your only chance to have some of those questions answered. Some examples for questions that I asked and I think would be reasonable to ask would be, what sort of exposure to, this technique or this population or this disease group or this practice type or whatever that you get in this program, something that's important to you, so that you can see what kind of exposure you can get. Another question could be, what residents do to maintain wellness. You also want to see how residents handle the stress of the program and how balanced it is. You can also ask how residents improve the program. Is there any mechanism for improvement? And then you can also ask if other residents have similar career interests to yourself, whether that could be, a career that's academic or in the community or with, a lot of teaching, with a lot of research, or someone who is able to practice independently right after residency, things like that. If you kind of know what sort of interests you have career-wise, you can ask if other residents had similar interests and how they were supported by your program. And lastly, a lot of students are interested in teaching and mentorship as a resident, so maybe asking what kind of opportunities there are for that. That's also helpful to ask as well. So in terms of how to prepare for the interview day, I would just make sure that you follow any directions you're given in your interview invitations. Make sure you have a professional background for these virtual interviews, and make sure you're comfortable and happy with how you look on camera. I would really spend some time preparing this, the day before, so that you don't have to play around with it on the day of. Just make sure that you're quite satisfied with how you appear for your interview before your interview starts. And lastly, I just wanted to make sure, you think carefully about, what's really in your control and what's not, so that you keep a reasonable perspective while you go through with your match cycle. What you can do to really maximize your chances of matching to your top choice program would be to be, positive, be prepared for your questions. Try to do your best to answer each question completely. Make sure you've really listened to the questions so you know what they're asking exactly, and make sure you deliver an answer to that question. You want to also answer as genuinely as you can. I really think a genuine performance will give you the best result, because you'll be speaking from the heart, and they will know that, and the right program will be the right fit for you, and will want you for that. And I think you can also practice well so that you're less nervous for your interview, and so you can deliver a smooth performance that's the best you can give. And the last thing that you can really do, and that's fully in your control, is you can rank based on your true preferences, and make sure you've really thought about those things before settling on your rank list. Some things that aren't in your control, and there's not really too much point worrying about it, would be how other people interpret your application, even the interviewers, because that's really up to them how they decide to interpret your answers and your application, and it's also up to them how they interpret other people's applications, and it's not in your control how other people decide to perform and how they decide to present themselves. And of course, anything related to COVID is not in your control either. So it's best to focus on what you can control and how you can do best in your interview cycle this year, and not worry so much about things that are outside of that. Lastly, I hope this presentation helps with your preparation. Feel free to send any comments you have, any questions, or if you've already gone through the match cycle yourself and you have tips, you can also add those as comments, and let all of us know how it goes on match day.